Morality matters most when it's inconvenient. And I'm making this video primarily just to highlight that theme, which has come up on my YouTube channel before. Secondarily, it relates again to this controversy with Unnatural Vegan, where I'm speaking in support of her. And thirdly, it relates to an issue in political science that I've never spoken about the channel before, I haven't heard other people speak about, that may be worth mentioning in itself for vegans who see this video. As a disclaimer, this controversy, the fact that I dared to speak in support of Unnatural Vegan on this cancer controversy, cost me money. I had Patreon supporters quit and cancel their donations over it. It cost me money, and I'll be blunt with you, I need that money. Currently, Patreon's the only income I have in the world, and even after I start this job in China, I've now apparently got a job lined up to start a few months in the future. That job only pays $750 a month. So if I can make $300 out of Patreon, that'll be a huge percentage of my income, and is a massive reward for me to take the time to come on YouTube and talk about veganism, talk about my life, etc., etc. So the impact for me is very real. Morality is often inconvenient. Being vegan is inconvenient. If you're only vegan when it's convenient for you, then you're not vegan. If you're only vegan except when there are no vegan options available, if you're vegan but not on a bus trip, if you're vegan but only when you're in California, not when you go to Arizona where it's maybe harder to find vegan options, then you're not vegan. You know, either you're vegan when it's inconvenient, when it really costs you something in time and money and energy, in suffering, and you got to go hungry for a night, or you're not vegan, right? Either you're moral when it matters, either you strike when the iron's hot, or you don't. So, I mean, I know this, now for my channel, this is a kind of a ridiculous example. It's unbelievable. Who would have thought that it would be a risky, I mean, if you've seen the video, it's a really tame, inoffensive video where I spoke in support of Unnatural Vegan. If I criticize Unnatural Vegan, that's an obvious risk. But there was an element of risk, and it has cost me. It's had a price that I dared to support Unnatural Vegan on this issue. And in the video, I recognized that she took a risk and, you know, alienated a lot of viewers, and a lot of people hated her for daring to say what she said. But I think she did the right thing. I think she did the right thing for the right reasons. And I applauded her at the time for taking that risk, and I applauded her again now for taking the risk. In politics, you have to strike while the iron's hot. This is sort of separate from the issue about morality that I guess I'll come back to. We've had a long series of police shootings in the United States. For example, Tamir Rice, shot dead by police. In general, the families of the person shot dead have cooperated with activists who wanted to take the particular example and turn it into a political cause, turn it into a political football. They don't always. Sometimes people die in tragic circumstances, and the families of the deceased do not want that type of exposure. They do not want the name of their loved one to be in the press. They do not want their tragedy to be exploited as a political cause, issue, football. They don't want their name dragged into politics. Now, it's very easy to imagine those examples. If you've been reading newspapers all your life, you'll remember examples from wherever it is you're living. They're normally local news. They're normally not national news. What if there's a family, hypothetical example, a family similar to Tamir Rice's family, a family of someone who's shot dead, but they decide they don't want that kind of exposure. They don't want this to become a political issue. They don't want to make any statement about the police or civil rights or the advancement of African American people or legal reforms to police procedure or police wearing cameras. They don't want to touch it, and they don't want their lives to be impacted by this type of activism. Hypothetical example. Let's say hypothetically also they're accepting donations. They're raising money in the wake of this tragedy of their family member who's been shot dead by the police. If someone comes out and criticizes them or criticizes the police, or if a group of activists decide to make this the focus of a civil rights campaign, of a campaign to raise the standards of, you know, conduct of police, community policing, ethics, etc., who's in the wrong? This is the way politics works. It happens very often with labor issues also. Often there's a particular employee who has a conflict with the employer, and they really don't want it to become a political issue. But the union gets involved, and the newspapers get involved, and somehow it becomes the focus of, a safety issue or a labor rights issue, some kind of dispute that becomes part of a larger social struggle. And either the person in the dispute, they may not want that, or their family doesn't want it. Again, the family of the deceased don't want it. But this is actually an intrinsic, important feature of politics, is that it's not up for you to decide. It's not up for the family of Tamir Rice to decide how important that issue is. That issue has public and social importance much larger than and much greater than the particular person who was killed. Although that is also in itself tremendously important. So the issue of a false and misleading cancer treatment is much more important than any one person subscribing to it, right? It's much more important than one person dying, precisely because it represents a threat to the lives of many people. It's an ethical issue and a scientific issue, etc., etc. I don't need to spell this out for you guys, but it is something much larger than the particular example being dealt with. So the response to this, and it's the most rational response I've had in terms of the reasons people gave me for why they quit my Patreon channel, why they were so offended that I dared to say this. The most rational response I've gotten was the "how dare you" directed to Unnatural Vegan. How dare she take this particular example of one person suffering, of one person's cancer, and turn it into a political issue, an issue for this broader debate. But that's exactly what politics always consists of. How dare you take one person being shot by the police and make it into a question of civil rights? How dare you take the issue of one person being maimed on the job, being injured at the factory, and then trying to get compensation, and turn that into a political issue? That's what we do in politics. Period. Always. You have to strike while the iron's hot. You have to take that particular example and show how it illustrates a legal reform you're pursuing, a constitutional issue, a civil rights, whatever the issues, a health and safety regulation issue. You have to do that. So Unnatural Vegan is 100% right in doing what she did, even though she has been punished in the court of public opinion. So coming back to my other point that you guys have heard me say before, morality matters when it's inconvenient for you. There were so many people who stood up because it was the right thing to do when it mattered. When Durian Ryder dragged my name through the mud, when he defamed me, when he threatened me with violence. There were people who stood up and said, no, this is not what veganism is supposed to be about. Right? And there are other people who waited. There are other people who didn't want to interrupt their vacations in Chiang Mai. There were other people who just pretended they were indifferent. When they knew what was going on, they weren't even pretending ignorance. Months and months went by, and then finally you got a kind of quiet statement on YouTube that, yes, what Durian Ryder did was immoral or something. That's nice. I mean, I still appreciate it when people made their statements of support. People like Happy Healthy Vegan, who, such a long time later made this very quiet statement in passing. One of the most ridiculous was Jeff Nelson from VegSource, who insulted me publicly repeatedly, and then made a one-sentence statement in support of me, and, opposing Durian Ryder on this show. Okay. Thanks, Jeff. But of course, when it matters is at the particular time. It matters that you stand up and do the right thing for the right reason when the conflict is still ongoing, when it can still make a difference, when it still really matters. And here on the internet, that's kind of easy virtue. It's not hard to do that with a medium like YouTube, because you don't even have to leave your house. You can just sit down in front of the internet and press a button and take a stand. So I mean, this is really easy virtue compared to any other form of social commentary, activism, engagement, or what have you. But Unnatural Vegan did the right thing in working from a particular example. She did the right thing by striking while the iron was hot, while making the video while the fundraiser was still ongoing. Those are two things she's most criticized for: that she dared to bring a particular person's name into it, that she made it while the fundraiser was still ongoing. That's when it matters. Doesn't matter if you make a video 6 months later when it's all over and done with. It matters, while the issue is still ongoing. And morally, with Unnatural Vegan, she showed that she's somebody who cares. She cares about the real issue. And there are so many of these people making money out of veganism on YouTube who don't care. So Izzy Davis, who now uses Izzy D, she was in Chiang Mai with me. As I recall, I think she met me for 5 minutes. She knew what was going on. Everyone in Chiang Mai knew what was going on. But it was simply not convenient for her to recognize this huge issue that had erupted in the middle of her vacation. Now, does she have to? No. But it tells me something about her. It tells me something about the kind of person she is and who she's going to be. Because the basic premise of morality isn't, I'm going to wait until it's convenient for me to be a good person. It's, I'm going to be a good person all the time. And I'm going to build up the strength of character to cope with those inconveniences. Because morality means facing down constant fear, inconvenience, insult, innuendo, threats, etc. It means coping with, it means coping with the immorality of the world around us, day after day after day. And developing a character over time for whom it's natural to be moral at all times without even making the decision. And I think for a lot of us, veganism itself is the perfect example. Because maybe there was a point early on when you actually felt tempted. You're hungry and there was nothing else to eat, whatever the situation was. You're at a bus station or something and, there's nothing else around. But then after a certain point, it's become part of your character. And you value that discipline. And maybe you even value that deprivation more than you would value, the momentary gratification, the convenience of eating. For some of us, the difference between truth and fiction, or the difference between science and pseudoscience, there are other moral issues that for us are so important that we're willing to take these other risks, to deal with these other slings and arrows publicly here on the internet. And really, again, internet morality, it's easy virtue compared to even getting on the bus and going down to City Hall and giving a sworn deposition to government, compared to real activism, directly trying to change the world by lobbying government or something. This is all easy virtue.